Hey gang, welcome back. It is I, DrBossKey, and we got a great question today, and it made me think about our animation pipeline a little bit. It's funny because as you continue to work through things, you develop tips and tricks and tactics and methods that, are kind of uniquely yours, but also sourced from other people. And so the question was, hey, how do you get sprite sheets or sprite animation into Shmup Creator? And I started to think about that, and so I gave a very brief description in the YouTube video on to answer the question, and then I thought I'd start to put together maybe just a little bit more. This is not meant to be an exhaustive how to do animation. I humbly speaking, my animation isn't great. It's not terrible, but I've learned a ton from doing it, and I thought I would just kind of walk you through my process and what this looks like. So maybe just to get you started a little bit, why don't we hop over and take a quick look? Let me push the right button. Push the right button. There we go. Hey, where's my audio? Oh, there we go. There we go. Some soothing, chill vibes. Okay, let's flip on over. Yep, okay, so I put together just some points to talk through. So 2D animation, a brief touch on techniques and getting 2D animation into Shmup Creator. This goes a little bit beyond Shmup Creator, but also includes kind of the processes and techniques we've used and what we discovered along the way. So overall animation consideration concepts, right? So you want to frame your thinking around 2D animation and gameplay. What this basically means, right, is that animation for games is different than animation in film or animation in VFX, for instance. And what it needs to do, animation always needs to serve gameplay first, and it needs to be, it needs to adhere to certain concepts, and I'll break those out in a second, but certain concepts that serve gameplay first. So for instance, a classic mistake, and you guys don't have to really worry about this so much in Shmup Creator because you don't have anything like frame blocking or animation blocking states, anything like that. Some of the concepts apply, but often mistakes that are made in the game industry is that animators will animate 2D or 3D characters, and they'll be amazing, great looking animations. And then what happens is that when players want to do an interaction, so for instance, like they want to, this is common, like, let's me put up a good example. So for instance, say you have a character that is about to open a treasure chest, right? And this could be 2D or 3D. So an animator could make an 8-second long animation of the character leaning down and flipping open the latch, or maybe picking the lock and then opening the lid slowly, and then having, you can have the glow and the effects from that. And that's all super cool. It looks great. But then you realize that took 8 seconds. And 8 seconds in gameplay terms is an eternity. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, you have 10 treasure chests in every level. And now the player who's already seen the beautiful animation for the first time, maybe they're okay for the second or third time, but at some point, you've seen it, there's nothing new about it, and it's not enjoyable anymore. It actually starts slowing down your gameplay. So classic mistakes are when animation starts to take over gameplay. Gameplay and game design and game development is first about serving interaction of the players. You can argue otherwise, but serving the interaction of the player and allowing players to either skip through the animations or to have less frames for the animation to make them punchy if they're going to do it all the time. And this extends to all different types of games. So general thinking there. So we talked about 2D animation a bit there, right? Another consideration point is that you need to think about what your art style is. Not just if you're 2D or 3D, entirely different different types of styles for that. But for instance, the way you may animate pixel art and your pixel art style is different than, to some degree, than maybe if you were doing higher resolution art, right? And that kind of depends on how you capture each frame for animation. That depends on your style of animation, right? Because that's the other thing, is you want things to kind of feel cohesive. You also want to kind of get a good sense about what your limitations are, right? If you're a 2D game, How does the animation serve you? How many frames animation do you have? What are the important parts? And I think in this case, and we'll touch on this a little bit more, it's important to also study games that you love, because those are going to give you a lot of your inspiration. And you can, and the best thing is, and I'll give you the links for all this in the description. But the best thing is that there's amazing sites out there where people have essentially ripped the sprite sheets from games, from classic games, modern games too, and so you can actually study those sprite sheets. You shouldn't put them in your game and then try to sell your game. That's not right, because you're going to get into copy protection issues and a bunch of other things. But there's no reason why you can't, from a prototyping perspective, study the sprite sheets and figure out what works for you and to really help inform and guide your style. So another aspect of this, right? Well, and actually, let's see here. So maybe I should flip a little bit over. So, okay, let's flip back over to this. So maybe to give a little more context, right? So here I have basically one of our levels. This is challenge level 3, and you can kind of get a sense for, our animation style, right? And one of the things I had to get my brain wrapped around is that you're always trying to create the least amount of frames possible, right? Because every frame of animation costs you more memory, and we'll dig into that a little bit as well. But also, it may not serve you well for what you want the characters to do. So, like, this is a dragon that flies around. This is temporary art, but you can see here that I borrowed and tech arted basically a very crude version of a spider, and then overlaid it on top of essentially one of our temporary art for like the demon turret here. So, or here, the thing with this guy is that he's a melee guy, and they fly around into the game, and they're meant to be just a tiny bit beefier, and their whole job is to try to collide with the player on their own strings and the way that they fly. And so here, communicating essentially that they are flying with their wings. You can see that there, but they're doing the chop. And we really want it to have this big like keyframe chop and kind of this effect that kind of comes through. And the other side of this too is that inside of Shmup Creator, you have to realize that a sprite sheet. Let me see if I can just show you a sprite sheet. Is that? Actually, let me see here. So let's take this guy real quick. Can I do this? Over to the enemies. And in here, Spritos. I think that, what is he? He's there he is, the Hellmaster. So yeah, so taking a look at this guy has 4 frames, and with how far back the windup frame is for the windup for the sword swing, and where it ends, and actually what you see for the flame bits here, you only see on an actual frame. So it gives you that feeling of the finality. But and even though there isn't as much change here, you see a little bit more change here in the wings. But the way that Shmup Creator goes through its sprite sheets, it first draws this frame, and then this frame, and then this frame, and then this frame. So it's one. So it's here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it starts over, right? And so you want to think about where your last frame is and what your first frame is, and because you only have looping in Shmup Creator. That's the only thing that it does. That's something else you should be aware of as a limitation currently in the engine, is that you don't have the ability to ping pong frames. So like, for instance, it would be neat to create animations where it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it goes 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it goes back and forth. But because then you could create tighter looping animations that way. Or for instance, maybe you wanted to do a boss fight, and you wanted to have a telegraphing frame here with this here, right? And so you wanted it to hold on this frame until you maybe you want it to hold for like a quarter second or half second, big wind up frame, right? And then you want to do the chop and then the rest of the animation, because you want to, in an engine, have maybe bullets spawn from it, or an attack, or maybe to rush forward. So you don't have the ability to control and synchronize the states of animation inside a Shmup Creator. So once you realize that, now there's some things you can do a little bit to work around it, but that means you'll never have fully accurate timing. And this is also in the documentation. So that's just to give an example. All right, let's flip back over. Let's see over here. Okay. So something else that's worth thinking about is if you're thinking about animation in Shmup Creator, but you haven't played around with the particle system, you really want to get a sense for what you can do with particles versus what you want to do with frame animation. And basically, the very short version is that particles allow you to draw lots of really small, lots of images. Don't have to be small, lots of images, and then you can put randomized elements, and you can draw lots of them at the same time. So the engine's optimized for that. And to give you an example of that, so for instance, right? So you'll notice this guy again here that in his animation he doesn't have any fire. I was one of these guys to be on fire. Oh, I don't have it anymore. And so what we're doing here is we use the particle system. We use the particle system to essentially just to add a little fire. We've got his kind of flamey bottom area. He's got like the hula scoop, the hula skirt, is the way I think about it, for his kind of flamey bottom. And then we basically use the particle system to get that extra animation. Now you could do this on a frame by frame basis, but by mixing these elements together, I get a little bit more of a dynamic aesthetic for the game itself, right? It also means that I can iterate on the different types of fire if I wanted to do that, independently of having to change the base sprite sheet animation every time. So hopefully that makes sense. Got to remember not to save. So a good example. So here's another cool example, right? Is that here's our sea Satan, right? So kind of our weird demonic giant ship that's been constructed from like the ancient bones of creatures and some, demon magic, right? And so here we could also in the sprite sheet, we could add the thrusters, right? But instead, we added the thruster separately, right? It's just a frame-based animation, but we do it through the particle system, and we did paint a little bit inside of here. You can see like the backsplash of the color of the thruster onto the backside of the engine to kind of make it a little bit cohesively together. But this gives us this also the other cool thing about this, right, is that by doing that and separating out some of these smaller effects from the sprite sheet to the particle system, I'm able to, for instance, reuse that thruster for other types of enemies. So you want to think about things that are reusable, right? Because and then we'll jump back over to the deck here. But one of the principles, right, is you don't need a ton of motion when it comes to shmups, but you need some, otherwise they're too static. And you want to think about how little things like particle elements can also, like, for the most part, the ship right now, it's a temporary one, but the ship is static. I don't need to do a ton here. We could probably do some changes with the guns itself and like the thrusters, but this gives us just enough visual fidelity that, can be reused. So think about that as well, because every time you can reuse an element, that's one less additional element you have to draw, and you get efficiencies in general with the engine by reusing elements. So because of caching and instantiation and a bunch of other things. All right, I know it's a dense video, so here we go. So that was the particle system and how you can leverage that with animation. So the other thing here, right, is you want to test your technical pipeline for creating animation as early as possible. If you don't know how to get stuff into the engine, you don't know how to work with sprite sheets, and especially if you're collaborating with other people, it's going to be very hard to give them feedback, but also to do hands-on iteration for yourself. You don't have to be great. I'm not great at art, not great at animation. It's all a journey for all of us, but I don't let that scare me to the point where I don't try to dabble around, because you will learn a lot, even if they're crude experiments on how to improve things. There are lots of people out there that do great work, but also, and we'll talk about this a little bit as well, but when it comes to sourcing assets, there are so many great asset packs out there now, and it's for the indie developers, and it's fantastic. There's so many cool things you can just get for just a few dollars. But that also means that you want to be able to inspect the packages and understand how to get that stuff into the game and how to make changes. You're basically a tech artist when you're an indie developer, amongst all kinds of other things. You know, being able to leverage those skills is important. All right, so the other thing here is you want to think about your image size, how many frames you need to convey the animation. And the general rule of thumb is always use the least amount of frames as possible. Technically speaking, you want your sprite sheets to be power of 2, because there you don't. It's not as big a deal for modern GPUs at this point. But so let me go back and show you. So let's see how. Coming back to, like, let's take a look at this guy real quick. So, for instance, if this guy wasn't in the sheet, right, and then what would happen is it would draw this frame, this frame, this frame, and it would draw nothing here because the sprite sheet is divided up into basically individual images. So when and it needs to know the resolution for each of the frames of images. And so you always want to make sure that you can have 2 frames, you can have 4 frames, 8 frames, you can have as many as you want, but you want to try to keep your sprite sheet in power of 2. Let's see here. So for instance here, you can see that the sprite sheet is a 256 by 256. And that means that basically that the individual image for the Robonoid Seeker here is what is that? That's 128 by 128. Yeah, so 128, 128 is 256, and then it's 256. So that gives us 4 frames. And it's important when you're developing your assets to realize that your frames of animation all need to be, this is the size of your enemy, right? They all need to be basically the same size. You can move stuff around, you can change the scale. There's lots of stuff you can do, but you never want to have a case where, for instance, part of like this image here is in this frame, because then what will happen is that it will then draw those pieces between the frames. So, and you don't want that. So we'll close this here. All right, moving on. What else we got? All right. So, all right. Let's see. That was tester technical pipeline. Image size we touched about. Oh, Shmup creator limitations. Yeah, so no frame hold or stop, no ping pong, no state-based animation. So once you realize that, there's stuff you can do, but you want to work around that. And some of this is already in the manual, so don't sweat it too much. But again, test your pipeline, set it up, and go through that. All right. Let's see. Maybe I had a note here. So let's see. Do I have this? Is it here? No. So I thought I would show you guys. Just do this. All right. I liked it too. So here, now that we know like an idea of animation, right? So in this is level 3 that we did. And so before I started going to, sorry, I was gonna get in a call and it's distracting me. All right. Before I got into working on the shoot 'em game that we're working on, basically I got a little bit deeper into doing animation. So and part of what I did when I was creating some of these characters and these animated shorts, because from the streaming channel and a bunch of other things, I started to work on my own style of more frame-based animation, and constructing these in After Effects. And so I brought a lot of that understanding and what I wanted to do, and this is like an homage to essentially like a fighting game arena. In the animated short, DrBossKey fights Gondis and Nada here. They have a big battle. It's super fantastic. It's not quite done, but and then I realized that when I was dreaming about the DrBossKey universe and thinking about how this could become a game and fighting basically the kaiju form of these characters, that was a really key image that drove like the project. So I thought I'd show you here. So here you've got, let's see here. Yeah, okay. So here you can see like basically just 2 frames animation, right? And then what I did in the engine is I really wanted to have this transition where, you know, Gondis is in the background. This is his arena. He's on the throne, right? And then basically he's making you fight all of his like minions and his ads, and like he's throwing all this stuff at you. And this is even before like you get to like fighting him, right? So, and I really want to, and in my animation, I had basically the crouch down, as you saw there, right? So they step down from the throne because I drew that second, I had that second frame of animation drawn, and got prepared for the leap. And then I have a frame of animation. Is it next? That's mute. E, oh man. N, R, T, nope. I'm looking for the hotkey, the shortcut for, there we go. All right, cool. Yeah, so I'm frame stepping through the video itself. So basically this is like a screen shake that's in engine itself, but I have these keyframes, and I'll show you how we kind of put that together in the engine here in a second. But basically this was like kind of a candy shot, right? Like this is like the preamble for the boss. Wow. That's a lot of frames. There we go. And then, there we go. And then I basically have a very short amount of frames. You can actually see both of them here at the same time, in that case, for the jump, right? And I really wanted to have like this moment where the boss steps forward, he's getting ready to fight, and they leap off screen. And then we do this big moment where we destroy the background, and then later on, you wind up fighting the boss. I want to have this like this section where basically his foot comes in, right? Like you're only fighting like basically like his lower part, and then you fight him in stages. So very video game tropes. So maybe to give an example of what that looked like, and I don't want to go too deep in the rabbit hole here, but this goes to show like you can still use frame-based animations in a way in the engine if you think about it in a clever way. So let's take a look. So that is the Dark Wellspring Chamber. Definitely don't save that because we're messing around with stuff. All right, and then so all right, so here let's go there. All right, cool. So basically what I did is you have the first version of Gondis and Nada sitting in front of the throne. I have them sorted into the background layer, so the player's in front of them, right? No collision, because we don't want you shooting them. We don't want you getting damaged. And all I did is these guys are basically, what is that? Gondis and Nada sitting on the throne. This is turning into a big show and tell, but it is what it is. Is it here? No. Here. Did I put those guys in the back? Nope. All right, cool. There we go. So here, I only needed 2 frames. Now, granted, he's pretty big on screen. I believe we're 512 by 512, so this is probably 10 to 44, so not quite power 2 in each axis. So, but here you can basically see that this is how we set that up. And then in engine, basically in order to do like the transition to the step forward, right? So you get the step forward here, and the step forward is basically we destroy this guy, and then right after we destroy him, we because we treat them as enemies, then we show this guy here. So that's the next frame, right? And then that holds for just a quarter second or so, and then we destroy him, and then we show the next sequence, right? So it's like basically this, and so now none of this is about gameplay. So in this case, I was able to go with trying to convey this transition, right? And I could use the engine in order, in a way to essentially set up dummy enemies that you couldn't interact with, and then just to make this key sequence of like how we're going to introduce the next transition of the stage, right? And so this is just to demonstrate that you can do things in the engine, but you have to think about how you want to accomplish them. And it's, you know, I'm not dissatisfied with the results. All right, so let's get back on track. I didn't expect that to take as long as it did. Holy moly. All right, let's see. Yeah. Okay. So that was about Shmup creator limitations and showing that you can do different things to work with those, right? All right. So resources. So here, and I'll put all these links in the description. So there's this fantastic website called the Spriters Resource. Hello, let's redirect. Go, 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 go. What are you doing? It's a pretty slow site at this point. All right. So, but the cool part about this is that all of these amazing, passionate folks for classic games have gone into these old games and they basically ripped out or they reconstructed sprite sheets by doing frame dumps of the animation. And so their challenge, and here's a good example of this, right? Their challenge was to try to understand how these classic games had made these enemies, right? And so like, here's a good example of like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, right? And so I'll put this link in the description. So when you're trying to figure out your own journey, find games that you love, that you really enjoy the art style for, you know, and for me, I really wanted demons and I wanted characters and I wanted spaceships kind of mixed together. That's our sort of flavor here. It gets me excited, right? And so taking inspiration from like Doom and other games, man, the site is insanely slow right now. But it gave me all of these hints for how we could construct basically our own types of sprite work, right? So good example, I was trying to load a video there. But like certainly like there's like a death intro here, but this is like, you know, Castlevania Symphony of the Night is one of my favorite games. Fantastic, right? And you look at like some of these like, oh look, there's the Diplocephalus. Oh, this is way too slow. All right. But you know, for instance, I still have like, let's see, lesser demon. Okay. So for instance, right? This guy, the Lesser Demon, is from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and the original sprite work itself is. Oh, it's like, oh no! Woo! That wasn't the right thing to grab. 1 second. Sorry, I should be more organized here. All right. So let's see. Assets, models, enemy sprites. That's in game. Here we go. And sprites, lesser. So as I was trying to learn how to do these things, I did this. I did some experiments with the Sprite sheet creator, animator, which was super cool. But I didn't wind up using it at the end of the day. Kickstarted that. But do I? Here we go. So here is basically a sprite sheet from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and I basically studied this, right? And I tried to understand, here we go, understand in, you know, the context, right? So here's him walking. So I was like, oh, cool. This is kind of the walk cycle, right? And you can look at the frames. Here's like an attack here, right? In this case, which was also cool. And you know, you've got some special attacks for the animation bits. You've got like a swipe thing here that probably got drawn for right here with like the attack itself. And what I was really interested in, because I wanted my dudes to fly, I was interested in these sort of like keyframes here, and also just how many frames we needed. So and so what I did is I pulled the sprite sheet apart, put it back together, and as you saw, we just had the 4 frames in our game here. And then just, I wanted to see whether or not I could make that work and feel well. And you can see here, I had challenges in understanding my sprite sheet dimensions, right? Because these wings are long, right? So this guy has to sit lower in the frame in order to account for the wings flaring open here. But this is a really strong keyframe, right? And from the pose here. And so I got a lot of mileage out of this. And as we go through the game and we're updating our own art, this has allowed me to learn the craft a little bit more, understand how it's put together, and also how to communicate with we're a very small team of 2. So with my artist on how to put things together. So yeah, so that's a long way of saying, hey, check those resources. This is a way you can go about it on your own. Let's get rid of these so I wouldn't save that. All right. And then let me go back. All right, so let's see here. Develop, sprite sheets. Metal Slug, amazing sprite work. So, you know, highly encourage you. Go find the things you enjoy. You can study those. The assets are out there. Fantastic, right? And it's very easy in Shmup Creator to essentially pull in a enemy sprite sheet to set it, and I'll show you how to do this in the editor in just a second. And then to iterate on it, you can basically have Photoshop or your photo editing software open. You can have the directory open if you want for where that image lives inside of your game, and you can just make changes to your sprites, save it, flip over the engine, and see those automatically changing every time the engine updates. It gives you an incredibly fast workflow, and a lot of times you need that kind of iteration because you're trying to feel what feels good from a gameplay perspective, what works well from a visual perspective, you know, and how all that comes together for you in your game. All right, and that was what that was about there. Okay, so let me run you through one other thing here. This is a little more complicated. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I thought I would open your minds up to another thing that we have here. So, all right. So here, we basically have, the statue head. So this hex portal opens and this statue head comes out of it. And basically it's me mentally thinking about this demonic titan that tries to hit you with these special attacks. He pulls these chunks of like these statues and throws them at you. And you can see the animation is very simple, right? Also when you pull in, basically I just wanted a rotating head, right? So when you pull in your enemy type into the engine, you want to make sure that you have the amount of columns and the amount of rows set and your animation speed. So I could set this to like 10, or I could set this to 0.1, right? And if you don't have the right rows or columns set, you'll see then it doesn't know how to draw those from your sprite sheet. So perfect example. All right, so here's how I did this. First, I could do a tutorial if people are interested on this as well. I went to the marketplace. In this case, so the Unreal marketplace or the Unity asset marketplace, 3D assets, all 3D asset is 3D. And if you want to take images of that in 2D, you can use that to essentially do crude framing or any kind of framing of your animations, right? So what I wound up setting up is inside of Unreal, I purchased as an asset pack, and this was mainly for level 3. So you can see here, right? I've got these assets. I didn't play with the lighting too much. It was all temporary, but then I found the statue head, right? Let me see here. Can I go full screen? Yeah. So I found the statue head here. I think this is probably the guy here. Yeah. And so you can see here, it's just a 3D asset. And I'm able to rotate it, and then you can set up if you do a little bit of Google searching, it's pretty easy to figure out. But you can set up essentially a workflow where from Unreal, you can use a sequencer to export frames of the individual images. So all I did here, and these frames that get exported, basically it removes the skybox. So that's the white and blue that you're seeing here. It leaves the lighting. So I had the highlights here. And so I came in, I copied, whoa, Dave. I got my, oh my goodness. Let me see here. What did I do? I think I'm in the wrong viewport. Ah, there we go. All right. So, and all I did is I duplicated basically this 3D asset. I rotated it, and then I knew in my mind I wanted 8 frames of animation for the rotation, and then because I wanted it spinning, and then I exported each one of these individually from Unreal, dropped those into a directory, and then I pulled them over and into Photoshop. I loaded them as a stack. So just so you guys know, if you're using Photoshop, there's this thing called load files into stack. And so you can browse to your asset folder where you have all the images, and then it'll bring in all the frames. So that's kind of nice, so you don't have to worry about adjusting them every time. And then I cropped the image size and I scaled it down. I knew I didn't want to have, these aren't super huge in the world. So, and I'll cover that in a second. So I knew I didn't really want a higher resolution than 128 by 128 for each frame. And then the other thing that's important here is that I have, and I'll link this as well, but I have a script called Sprite Sheet Generator 0.06. So after I aligned all the frames, I basically can take and run this Sprite Sheet Generator. And you can see it's iterating right now, making copies of each of the image layers. And I'm a little close on the top here on this. So you want to make sure, sometimes you want to have like at least one pixel line that is, you can see kind of at the top there, but you basically want to have one little pixel line to separate so you don't have bleed over between your different images. So here I use that script. It took each one of my images and it created a sprite sheet, right? So, which is a 512 by 256 sprite sheet. And you can see here, it just goes, through each of these frames and then just keeps iterating through, right? So I don't need to save any of that. I'll save that. So here I'm just trying to open your mind to the fact that you could use an entirely different asset pack, game engine software, and from these game engines, you can essentially export, cut out, and create PNGs by manipulating 3D objects. It doesn't work for everything. It works in this case because it's simple for me, but this is a good way of showing like how you can get quite a bit of mileage by just extending your familiarity with other workflows and paths. And so for me here, I'm gonna close this and I don't want to save anything. I have that in my back pocket for when I'm prototyping and working through my own data paths, right? So when we talk about essentially develop your workflow and automate the construction of sprites. So here, the good news is I could at any point go get a 3D object from any source, drop it in Unreal, through the marketplace or whatever, or Unity. I can then do basic rotations or adjustments or scaling, like you can do quite a bit with 3D objects, and then use that as a basis for then exporting. But I also know like where my scripts are for how to get the images out, right? And then you want to document this for yourself so you don't forget, so you don't have to remake the wheel every time. And once you've developed that methodology, then you have a way of iterating through, right? So that's basically your pipeline. And we all go through it. And I can't stress enough that it takes time and patience. Not every test is going to work for you, but there are quite a few ways that you can go about doing this. All right. One other small thing here is, so sometimes you may find that when you buy an asset pack that they only give you GIF animations. Maybe you're buying an effects pack and it's a 2D effect. And it only comes in the form of a GIF. So I'll link this in the description as well. But basically, I found a very, very simple tool online, easygif.com. You upload your GIF, and then what it does is it splits the GIF out into frames, and now you can choose which frames you want to create to complete that animation. So another way of taking existing assets that are free or out there that you can purchase and tech arting those into your into basically your game. All right, so yeah, when we talked about this, right? Unity Asset Store, Unreal Asset Store, all fantastic stuff. There's lots of freebies out there too. So you always have to think about it at the end of the day. If you're not strong in doing the art or the animation, you either find other people that are willing to help you or that you can pay, or they've already done the work and that you can leverage and figure out. You have to always double check your licensing, right? But and that you can leverage for both your game or as a basis for tech arting that into something that's more uniquely yours, right? Belongs to you and your own, the identity of your game. All right. DrBossKey animation workflow. Okay, so yeah, so we covered that already. So that was the statue head source workflow from UE, Photoshop frames exported, sprite sheet construction. Again, I'll link all this stuff in the description. Did I miss anything? Oh, I know what I missed. All right, resources. So I read this fantastic article a bunch of years ago, and it was. Hey, did I miss this? Where'd it go? Where did it go? Oh, I thought I had that. Okay, let me take a look. 1 second. Stuff and things. Thought I had this. All right, 1 second. All All right, I'm just gonna look this up. Go to history. You don't realize how many web pages you open until you start working through it. All right. Game developer. There's 5 tips, right? There we go. All right. Okay. So sadly, this article that was written a billion years ago was 2012. That's how long ago I think I read this thing. It since has moved. This used to be called Gamasutra. It's now Game Developer. But they had some really rock solid advice. Now you can take these principles and you do your own Google searches. But I thought I would cover these for a second, right? So Mercenary Kings is also fantastic. So it's basically 5 tips, right? 1, push the limit, right? So basically, don't worry about breaking the frames. Don't worry about smearing. The more you start to research this and the deeper down the hole, the more you're going to learn. But the main thing is that you want to have extremes, because that's what catches the eye. You want to have big motions, right? And even if it's one frame to the next, given the type of game you want to have these big elements that are easy to see, right? And like he says here, I just try to make the most awesome and ridiculous thing I can think of. So don't worry about your animation being realistic. This is all abstract anyways, right? And that's kind of in our own game style. Maybe giving an example, right? Like these aren't, like here, right? The wings, they're not even functioning really like wings. The eye warbles back and forth. We do these these scale ups for these for the egg sacs here, right? We got our little Nada here who's just doing her push thing. It's just to create enough movement to catch the eye, right? You can see I did 2 exports there. Same thing here, even though the laser doesn't always come out of the cannon here, the cannon has big frames to see that it has motion, right? That's the style that we've developed for for our game, and to make sure that kind of reads like here, the Loki animation. It's this rocking back and forth. The tail is whipping. The wings are big and flappy, and then we wanted to keep a little slider. Little touches with the hair tufts on the ears, right? To give it that flavor of character. And we don't have any places where you're studying deeply and able to see all the animations. What happened? That was funny. Yeah, so I think that the key here, right, is these big animation bits, right? And you kind of saw it here when we sitting, crouching, jumping, right? Very, and even though all the animation here is just in the editor, I basically put this guy on a waypoint, right? That's it. And I have it on maximum speed, and that's how I wound up doing the animation. So I have the frame, and I'm using in-engine Shmup Creator's waypoint system in order to move the character around. So, and you can see there's plenty of things here. So, but back to this. All right. So 2, make everything bouncy and feel alive, right? You only have so many frames anyways. Make those frames big, easy to see, make them feel like they're full of motion. 3, create strong keyframes and silhouettes. All right. And we already talked about that a little bit as well. 4, try to limit your frames. We also covered that as well. Less is more. The more frames you have, the more muddy it winds up getting, but also you want to be efficient, right? And there's differences making a fighting game with like Street Fighter in 2D than making a shmup. So it doesn't all apply the same way, but there's some similar concepts there. And then 5, the advice is don't fret too much over the craft. There are all, and here he basically goes on to say that, fans and animators of sprite-based games can sometimes fetishize pixel art. Like people care deeply about the craft, and that's fantastic. What you're trying to do is define your own style for your game. And, and maybe that is taking inspiration, or limiting your color palette or the way that you animate. For me, working with my artist, it was that he's traditionally an artist. He's not an animator. So it was important for me to guide him through the ability to, with just a couple frames, creating animation that gives the kind of character that I like and that I identify with from classic games as well, right? So, and you're on the journey to do a similar thing. So I'll link this article as well. So I'll put that up over here. And I thought I'd put that in the deck, but you know, boop, right there. All right, so last and maybe, you know, also important. So here, so one of the first things I did, and this was a few years ago at this point, is I essentially wanted to develop an art style where I couldn't afford to do a crazy amount of frame by frame animation. So I went with more of a billboard style animation, and in here, and then telling these small narratives, and then having big effects over the top, so you can see like the juices from the mouth. You can see the burning from the eye here. This is one of our boss monsters that won't be in this game. He's going to get his own game at this point because Gondas was the thing, right? So, and then using effects that we could purchase from marketplaces and some other video things like, so we were able to tell quite a bit more story on a more efficient budget because I don't have that kind of budget, right? And learning how to do that was took a lot of time, but it helped me better understand how I wanted to convey some of the style into the game. So and I made these as part of just an animation project and part of the Twitch channel for the DrBossKey universe. And then I have some other clips here. So here's a good example of like DrBossKey. You know, he's got his armament. Every time he defeats a boss monster, they become these living weapons. So these little stories I was able to convey, they're really really short animations. And these are animations that we just play on the Twitch stream. Sometimes people would ask for them. Sometimes we do them as just awards for like subs and things like that. But it helped me tell these small stories about the character. This is DrBossKey. He flies around his ship, you know, but you know, here's a version where he has a dragon attack, and he's got his soul key blade, which, by the way, that soul key blade is what actually made the Veil Piercer starship. And by going through and doing these, so this is his artifact that absorbs the souls of enemies and converts them into living weapons or objects or things like that. So it really helped me start to understand, you know, and probably this animation was a good like 25 hours, maybe 30 hours of work in After Effects and kind of understanding, but it helped me understand how to tech art. And I wouldn't put this in the game in this particular way because this would be a crazy amount of frames. So when we don't have the ability to do video playback in the engine, I could render it all out as a sequence, but it would be grossly inefficient. And you know, like that's just something to keep in mind. Anyways, I don't want to get too far off the rails here. So, but the point here, the moral of the story here is that by exploring your own animations in a basic way, you can create the limitations and kind of match your imagination to what you're trying to achieve. And that's going to help you transition your own character and design sensibilities into your game. You know, and it's all a journey. All right. So did we cover everything? One minor thing here that's probably worth. So a while back, a long time ago, this is much older at this point, I highly encourage you to do size tests of your art in game. And so here I really want to always encourage you to, before you deal with scaling in the engine for sprites and things like that, understand what your target resolution is. In my case, in our case for the game, it's 1920 by 1080, 16 by 9. It can scale higher, but I wanted to have that as our sort of base, right? That's pretty modern for games these days in terms of resolution support. And I really wanted to understand on a one-to-one basis how big is a 512 by 512 texture. And so just very simple. Here's a 512 by 512. 256, 128, 64 by 64, right? So the reason why this is important, again, when you come back to frames, is that if this is how big your enemy is, then, and you want to do 24 frames of animation or, 24 frames of animation, you're going to have a giant texture sheet in your game. And if you have too many giant texture sheets, you're going to blow out your memory. You can do quite a bit, don't get me wrong, especially on modern PCs. But you know, it's something you want to be cognizant of. So, and it's also a waste, right? Like, because anytime you scale, so if you make a 1024 by 24 and then you scale it down by half in the engine still treats it as a 1024 by 1024 scaled. You'll get scaling artifacts. It's not bad. I mean, we've got some good filters in the engine, but you'll also, you still incur the cost of the GPU memory for that, right? So this is why one of the things I do is if we're making just a small enemy and it's this size, then, and I want to make 4 frames of animation, then it's, this would be like 1, 2, 3, 4. So it would be 128 by 128, right? Or if I want to make 8 frames because I want to do rotations, things like that. So anyways, you're on a crazy journey. There's a lot here. Did I miss anything? Because I know this is a long video. I hope people appreciate this. If you have any questions or suggestions or feedback, if I got anything wrong or there's something else you'd like to see, let me know. Let me know in the comments. Thank you everyone that's been following along on the journey. Like, it's all a crazy journey. I'm not the most professional about all things in this case, but I do have a passion, and it's been a lot of fun to just do the experimentation, do the journey, you know, and put myself out there in a way that allows me to, you know, to essentially discover the craft, right? Because until you have a sense for how long it can take to create something, it's very hard to work with other folks to understand how long things will take from that side. Sure, you can work with them and be like, hey, let's work on frame animation and see how this goes, and you can learn from them. That's fantastic. But you know, at the end of the day, you know, it's that you don't know a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes type of thing. So I always try to dabble a little bit, even knowing that where I want to be artistically is much further off. But by engaging with that part of the journey, by thinking about these things and doing these experiments early in your own craft for your game, you're going to get a lot out of that. But also it helps you understand how to better work with other people, or how to go out and find assets, or how to work with those assets. So it's a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. We will talk to you soon. Bye.